universe speaking to you. You are now tuned into the Modern Spiritual Life Coaching Podcast by the certified master life coach and spiritual guide, Coach Chip. Welcome, souls. We now begin this episode of a transformational journey. Unedited, unscripted, and creating something from nothingness. Now, let there be light on Modern Spiritual Life Coaching.
The scheduled sponsored podcast episode, a smoking podcast, elevated by Claudine, has been canceled. We are returning to our original programmed episode. This is episode 107 of the Power Half Hour, the Albert Einstein original radio interview. That's packed with the 30 minutes of Albert Einstein, the world genius. You now hearing this exclusively on the Modern Spiritual Podcast Live.
But did you believe in eternal space? It's the Power Half Hour on the Modern Spiritual Life Coaching Podcast. I gotta get my day going here in the afternoon. Well, I just want to let you know that we're back on the Power Half Hour this Saturday afternoon here at 12 noon Eastern Time, Mountain Time. I keep saying Eastern Time, don't know why, for 3 p.m. The other show that we had on was a smoking show elevated by Claudine has been canceled for temporarily. We'll let you know when that show does come back. But we're going to learn about on this Power Half Hour a handful of Albert Einstein. And that was the song you just heard that somebody wrote about Albert Einstein, the original version. We're going to go into a motivational success story about Albert Einstein so you can get acquainted about him when he was a child. There's some things that you may not have known about him. And then we're going to go into the very rare recording of a radio interview back in his day when he actually took his test to become an American citizen. And you're going to hear that in-depth interview exclusively right here. Then we'll move it on with a chant, a Buddha chant that will clear all negative vibrations and all obstacles and bring you into success. So let's now get into this motivated success story right now with Albert Einstein on the Power Half Hour of the Modern Spiritual Podcast Live.
Albert Einstein grew up in a middle-class family. When he was born, his family was scared that something was wrong with him. He had a very large and misshapen head. But fortunately, within the first few weeks, the shape of his head became normal. But their worries didn't stop there. When he was very young, his parents thought he might be intellectually disabled, because he was very slow to learn to talk and did not speak until he was 4 years old. At that time, he often formed full sentences in his thoughts, but did not speak. He used to practice the sentences in his head or whisper them softly under his breath until he got them right, and then say them aloud. Many people believed Einstein would never succeed at anything. When he was 5 years old, his father showed him a simple pocket compass, and Einstein was fascinated, and that was the beginning of his obsession with science. He also began playing the violin at the age of 6 and would continue to play throughout his life. At school, Einstein was a good student. Most of his grades were high, and he was near the top of his class, but mainly because of math and science, so his grades depended mostly on his interest in the subject. When Einstein was only 10 years old, he started educating himself. By the age of 12, Einstein taught himself geometry, and by the age of 15, he mastered calculus. But he hated the disciplined and rigid style of the teachers, so he dropped out of school at the age of 15 and left Germany to avoid military service. His parents were worried that their son became a school dropout with no employable skills and not very promising future. But Albert Einstein did not quit his education. He applied to the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, and believe it or not, he failed the entrance exam. Albert Einstein failed an exam. Well, he wasn't prepared. He excelled at math and physics, but his knowledge on subjects other than that was not good. So he failed the exam and had to take it a second time, and then he was admitted. There he met his future wife, Mileva Maric. She was the only woman among the 6 students in that section. After finally graduating, he couldn't get a job in academia for almost a decade. Every one of his professors knew that Albert was brilliant, but they were also bothered by his rebellious and disobedient side, so they refused to recommend him for various positions, so the academic institutions wouldn't hire him. But young Einstein needed money, so he got a job as a clerk in a patent office. office. The job was mostly mindless and very easy for Einstein, so he liked the job because he had so much free time to study and research while working there, and he developed his most important theories while working his boring job. He developed the theory of relativity and the world's most famous equation. Einstein was nominated for a Nobel Prize, but did not receive it until 11 years later. Albert Einstein became the most influential physicist of the 20th century. His research changed the world. He wrote hundreds of books and was also a great philosopher, so there's so many things to be learned. I have no special talent. I'm only passionately curious. So follow your curiosity, whatever that is. See where it goes. Never be afraid to question the world around you. And don't be afraid of failing and making mistakes along the way. A person who never made a mistake never tried anything new. Dare to discover and dare to make mistakes. That's what divides successful people from unsuccessful. Don't be afraid to conquer your fears and don't be afraid to follow your passion. You don't have to be the next Einstein. Be the best you can be. So rise up tomorrow and become a person you would be proud of. The world is waiting for you. So, what's your story?
The Immigration and Naturalization Service of the United States, in cooperation with the National Broadcasting Company, has invited a number of naturalized citizens to talk about the American citizenship which they have recently acquired, a possession which we ourselves take for granted, but which is still new and thrilling to them. Today, we are delighted to have with us as guest on this program the distinguished scientist Dr. Albert Einstein, who has this very morning, just a few hours ago, taken his citizenship examination. Certainly, there could be no better time for Dr. Einstein to discuss with Mr. Marshall Dimmock, the Second Assistant Secretary of the Department of Labor, some of the reasons for his appreciation of American citizenship.
Dr. Einstein, I know that you seldom give interviews, and so I want to thank you on behalf of all of our listeners for coming here today. I'm sure that what you have to say will be of real interest and service to your new country.
It is clear to me that it was a self-evident duty to accept this invitation. Though I must tell you that I do not think words alone will solve humanity's present problems. The sound of bombs drowns out man's voices. In ordinary times of peace, I have great faith in the communication of ideas between thinking men. But today I am afraid the intellectual way to appeal to man is fast becoming of little avail, with brute force dominating so many millions' lives.
This morning, Dr. Einstein, I was privileged to be present while you took your final examination for American citizenship. Will you tell us why you, who are international in your outlook and by virtue of your scientific interests, prefer to live in America rather than in any other country?
7 years ago, Mr. Dimmock, when asked for the reason why I have given up my position in Germany, I made this statement. As long as I have any choice, I will only stay in a country where political liberty, toleration, and equality of all citizens before the law is the rule. Political liberty implies liberty to express one's political opinion orally and in writing, and a tolerant respect for any and every individual opinion.
That is real American doctrine. But tell me, do you feel that America still fulfills the requirements you mentioned as a place in which to live?
Yes, Mr. Dimmock. Making allowance for human imperfections, I do feel that in America the most valuable thing in life is possible: the development of the individual and his creative powers. There may be men who can live without political rights and without opportunity of free individual development. But I think that this is intolerable for most Americans. Here, for generations, men have never been under the humiliating necessity of unquestioning obedience. Here human dignity has been developed to such a point that it would be impossible for people to endure life under a system in which the individual is only a slave of the state and has no voice in his government and no decision on his own way of life.
I agree with you, Dr. Eintsein. We simply will not be driven about like sheep. We are independent. We are self-reliant. We do not know what it means to be deferential to class or position. Fortunately for us, obey is a little heard word, and cooperate is a common one.
Yes, I think from what I have seen of Americans since I have come here, they are not suited by temperament or tradition for existence under a totalitarian system. I think that most of them would not find life worth living so. Therefore, it is very important that they consider how these liberties that are so necessary to them may be preserved and defended. I am glad to hear you say that Americans can cooperate because nothing truly valuable can be achieved except by the unselfish cooperation of many individuals.
Dr. Eintsein, you are a scientist and must regard scientific progress as one of man's highest achievements. And yet it seems to many people nowadays that science and invention have brought human beings more trouble than good. Technological unemployment, international quarrels for the raw materials of industry, and finally the weapons of mechanized warfare. How do you think the discoveries of science might be turned from man's own destruction to his advantage?
Science has provided the possibility of liberation for human beings from hard labor. But science itself is not a liberator. It creates means, not goals. Man should use them for reasonable goals. When the ideals of humanity are war and conquest, those tools become as dangerous as a razor in the hands of a child of 3. We must not condemn man's inventiveness and patient conquest of the forces of nature because they are being used wrongly and destructively now. The fate of humanity is entirely dependent upon its moral development.
I have often wondered why it was that leaders in science and culture had so little influence on the course of political events. What is your opinion in that matter?
I think it is quite understandable. Scientists and artists, through their works, frequently have had enduring influence even in the realm of politics. But in order to influence the course of political events directly, one must also have the gift to influence people and their actions directly. This is rather a matter of arousing and using emotions and personal confidence than of clear understanding of causal connections. For this reason, intellectuals have little chance to impress an audience. Also, they usually do not have the gift to make decisions swiftly. Among the outstanding American statesmen, Woodrow Wilson is perhaps the truest example of the intellectual type. But he too did not seem to have mastered the art of dealing with man. His greatest achievement, the League of Nations, appears today as a failure on superficial observation. But in spite of the mutilation of his contemporaries and the boycott of his fellow countrymen, Wilson's work, in my opinion, will be recreated in a more powerful form. Then only will the importance of this great innovator be fully recognized.
What hope have you, Dr. Eintsein, that another League of Nations could prevail in a nationalistic world with its unevenly distributed resources and its unsettled economic conditions.
I am convinced that a federal organization of the nations of the world is not only possible, but even an absolute necessity if the conditions of our planet are not to become unbearable for man. The League of Nations failed because its members were not willing to give up a part of their rights of sovereignty, and because the League was without any executive power. A world organization cannot ensure peace effectively unless it has control over the whole military power of its members. Exaggerated nationalism is an artificially created emotional state resulting from the necessity to be prepared for war. This exaggerated nationalism would quickly disappear with the elimination of the war danger. I do not believe that the unequal geographical distribution of raw materials must necessarily lead to war. As long as a nation has access to the materials which are necessary for its development, it can very well prosper. This is clearly shown by nations such as Switzerland, Finland, Denmark and Norway, which belonged to the most prosperous countries of Europe before the war. One of the most important functions of such an international organization would be to secure unhampered distribution of the raw materials and free access to markets. The solution of the internal economical and social problems could be left largely to the individual states.
I cannot help but wonder if this statement is not a bit too optimistic. Can one strive towards an international order founded on justice, while on the other side of the Atlantic brute force is strangling one democratic nation after the other?
I am far from being optimistic. What I have told you is not a prophecy, but a statement of what must be done to prevent life on this earth from becoming unbearable. Everybody will agree that we are now farther removed from this goal than seemed to be the case 10 years ago. This setback could have been avoided if the democracies had then shown the same solidarity and readiness for sacrifice they have shown now in this hour of grave emergency. Will to sacrifice, solidarity and wise foresight, however, are most effective before the hour of dire necessity has arrived. May our America be spared such an hour through the resolute action of her citizens and statesmen.
You have great faith in your chosen country, Dr. Eintsein. I hope we may be worthy of it through all our acts and decisions and attitudes during these trying times when emotions often deprive men of ability to see things clearly. I believe that most Americans act like Americans. By that I mean that they are innately just, tolerant, and reasonable. But a time of crisis tests the democratic qualities. For example, with 8 million naturalized Americans and 4 million aliens among us, we are challenged as a democracy to prove to ourselves and to the world that tolerance is not only an ideal, but a practical possession of all Americans.
I believe that America will prove that democracy is not merely a form of government bound to a good constitution, but also a way of life supported by a people who have a good tradition, a tradition of moral strength. And the fate of the human race is more than ever dependent on its moral strength today.
Thank you, Dr. Eintsein, for your...
That's it for this episode, and you just heard the real interview, the original of Albert Einstein's in the USA, which is a classic of a historic, because not many has heard an interview of Einstein. We've heard his quotes, seen his photos, and different things like that, but not an interview. So this is a golden oldie for this one. And coming up next, I'm going to leave you with the Ganesh mantra. Very powerful mantra for success. It's going to remove all those blocks, obstacles in your life that's keeping you from going forward. Because you know the boundaries and the barriers are all from within inside of us. So we must remove those so we can go forward and continue into success on the right path. So wherever you listen to from around the world, I bid you a good day and a good night. Until Monday morning, I will be back with the Happy Pandemic Monday with the Morning Gratitude on the Modern Spiritual Podcast Live.
Om Ganapataye Namaha. 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 Om गणपतये नमः। ॐ गणपतये नमः। गणपतये नमः। गणपतये नमः। गणपतये नमः। गणपतये